Welcome to Season 5 of Real Garage. Today, I'm hitting the brakes on this project. No, I'm not stopping the build, but I am changing the stock brake system to a racing style setup. And the first thing I'm going to update is the pedals. So I choose the tilt and hanging pedals for this project. And no, I'm not a paid representative. I buy these just like everyone else. I just like to tell people what I use and why. And I choose these because they're extremely adjustable. Not just in length, but also pedal angle and side-to-side offset. And you'll see why that's important here in a minute. There are a couple ways you can mount these things, and both of them require that you remove some of the firewall and beef it up with some plate steel. And then what I like to do is make an additional framework and support these from the top. You can apply a ton of pressure to these pedals, and if there's any flex in the mount, that would be bad. Figuring out how you want to mount these things can be a pain. One of the ways I've done it in the past is have the pedals straddle the steering column. This is okay if you always intend on being a 1-foot driver, but in my application, it will be in race trim most of the time. So I need the extra room to use both feet. One foot manages the throttle and the other works the brake at the same time. So I'm going to mount my pedals to the left side of the steering column. And this is where that pedal adjustment flexibility comes into play, because I can fine-tune the pedals for comfort and efficiency. The mounting area for the pedals and the master cylinder is 90 degrees to the body and the frame. So I'm shooting for that during fabrication. And now that I know exactly where I'm mounting the pedals, I made a template for the pedal mounting bolt locations. And then I transferred that to the firewall. Now let's just mark the firewall area that needs to be cut out. Warning, read and follow all labels and your owner's manuals. I'll be using the Spectrum 375 plasma cutter set for 17 amps. Also, I'm not using the drag shield for this thin material. I'm just using the exposed tip with the deflector ring so I can see my cut lines better. Then I'll use the cutout for a template to mark the 12-gauge plate steel. 1/8 inch works fine too if you have that. For this thicker material, I turn the plasma up to 22 amps. Okay, so after a couple minutes of grinding the plate to fit, I've got it held in place with a bunch of these magnets. And actually, truth be told, it took me about 25 minutes to get it to fit the way I wanted it to. But I'd say I got it pretty darn close. Now, let's just put a bunch of tacks in between the magnets. Welding a thick to thin gauge butt joint can be troublesome. To set your machine, start by splitting the difference between the two thicknesses. And always try to start your arc on the thicker material and let it wash onto the thinner metal. In this application, my firewall is 20 gauge and the plate steel is 12. So I'm auto setting the Multimatic 220 AC/DC to 16 gauge, and I'll probably fine tune it from there. For finish welding, I like to do short spot stitches followed up by forced air. This helps prevent burn through and warpage because it keeps the base metal from getting hotter and hotter as you're welding on it. And when you're metal finishing your weld joint smooth, be careful not to remove too much material or a joint crack could appear. To eliminate that problem, you can also weld it from the back side. And this brings me right into a real gear segment. My Multimatic 220 AC/DC came with the MDX 100 gun, which fits most Miller Multimatics, Millermatics, and wire feeders. There's a lot of features I like about this gun. First is the small, comfortable handle and the positive trigger. It's actually a real switch. Here, listen. It's not just two blades squeezing together. It's an actual micro switch. And the screw-on nozzles, they're way more robust than this slip-on style. Next is a big one. The MDX style guns have liners that are inserted through the front instead of from the rear. Why is that important? Well, it feeds wire more consistently while increasing the life and electrical contact of the tip because it has perfect alignment and engagement with the contact tip. Here, let me show you. See how the liner is in perfect alignment with where the contact tip mates. Have you ever had to remove your contact tip just to run new wire through your gun? That's because most rear-fed liners don't mate up properly with the contact tip. Plus, you're usually guessing at what length to even trim the liner to. With front-load liners, it's simple. You just trim the backside once it's through the back of the power pin. Today, I'm putting an 023-030 liner in my MDX gun because the thin 20-gauge material I'm welding is only about 35 thousandths thick, and 023 wire will run better on this thin material. If you just use the standard 030-35 liner that comes in the gun, you would experience feeding and arc starting consistencies because the 023 or 024 wire is loose and snaking inside the larger liner. Welders are electromechanical machines, and consumable matching is important for good performance. That means making sure that the liner power pin cap, drive rolls, and contact tip are all the same size. You know, there's a lot of times I should have pumped the brakes during my life. And one of those was a learning experience where I learned the value of better brakes. When I was younger and a good bit dumber than I am right now, I built a '78 black Trans Am that was stupid fast. It had a 406 Chevy race motor, Borg-Warner Super T10 transmission, racing shocks and springs, but stock brakes. That car would do 130 in third gear and had another gear to go. One night I met this girl at a house party and decided to impress her with a ride. Ultimately, we ended up in a farmer's front yard. It's amazing how much your butt puckers when you find out how long it takes to stop a 160-mile-an-hour jaunt on a backcountry road. Needless to say, I did not get any follow-up dates from her. And if my parents are watching this, yes, it's the same car that I crashed 6 months before I went in the Army. All right, with it welded in place and metal finished, I'm taking the original cutout piece that I marked with the hole locations and using it to transfer the 2 diagonal mounting holes to the new firewall plate so I can double check the pedal fitment. These are 5/16 studs, so initially I'll use a 21/64 bit. May have to go a tad larger if things need to be adjusted. Once the final fit location is set, I'll use the original paper template to mark the remaining mounting holes and the cutouts for the master cylinders. For the upper pedal mounting frame, I'm using this 3/4 inch square tubing that's 083 thick. I'm just leaving the pedals bolted to the firewall for measuring and fitting all these pieces. Once I get all the parts cut and fit, I'll grind all the weld joints and tack them into position with MIG. Then pull it out and finish TIG welding it on the bench. Notice that I'm leaving it mounted to the pedal assembly for welding. This will act like its own little jig fixture and keep everything squared up. Since this is just mild steel tubing, I'm using 045 ER70S2 filler metal, and I have my multimatic set for 110 amps, which I'm regulating with the foot control. Now is also a good time to weld your nuts. Even though you might have enough room to get a couple wrenches up underneath the dash right now, I guarantee when you get all the wiring in and the ventilation stuff, it ain't happening. So do yourself a favor and weld your nuts. With the top support frame welded, it's time to fit it back in the car. I'll tack it in place first, then remove the pedal assembly to finish welding. My square tubing is 083 and the front plate is only 1 gauge thicker, so I'm auto setting the multimatic to 1/8 inch and fine tuning it down a little bit. For the top welds, I'm setting the machine to 14 gauge. Now you can see why this crossbar is 1 inch up from the bottom. Because if you didn't, you'd never be able to slide the pedals out from the studs that are Loctited in. So, plenty of room there. Plus, this is also where the brake light stop switch will get bolted onto here. And you have to have a way to remove that too. There'll be no farmer's field for this girl. Next time on Real Garage, we'll get rid of all the extra holes I got going on in the firewall. And I'll do a real scoop on MIG welding and TIG welding silicon bronze.